So what we're going to work on today on this car is we're going to cut all these tie rods loose, which is going to be pretty easy because they're just tack welded. And then we're going to rotate the steering to make sure it's in the middle, because the last thing I want is the steering to be off too much to one way. So let's get these tie rods cut, bring the car down, find the steering, and then we will start building our new tie rods. So let's go from here, boys. So the first thing I do to these tie rods is I cut off the boot. Like, yes, when you're driving on the road, that boot's designed to keep the water and the muck out, but for the demolition derby, because these cars have such a short lifespan, it really doesn't make a big difference. Get rid of it. I just cut the tie rods, butt weld them together. Now that is only temporary. I threw the tire on there to make sure it's straight. I have the steering wheel in the center of its lock to lock, which is 3 turns lock to lock, so at 1.5, that's where the wheel's sitting. And so I've tack welded it, I've got that removed. Now what I have to do is I have to do the same over here. So we'll remove this boot, just undo this, take a knife, cut around it, pull it off, and then what we'll do is we'll put this center, then we'll mark the tie rods and we'll cut them, and then we'll do this side just tack welding, and that'll show you how I reinforce my tie rods. So now we got both tie rods welded, just tacked, butt welded together, and we got the car sitting on the ground. And as you can see, this driver's side tire is dead straight. Now you come over to this passenger side tire, and it's not. So that's one thing you should always check when doing this, is make sure you check it before you fully weld it with weight on the car to make sure that the tires are actually facing the exact same. So what we're going to do is we're going to go down there right now and we're going to cut it a bit. And we're going to kick the tire in and then re-weld it. But we're going to try to do it with the pressure on the car. That way we know that when the car's on the ground, the tires are in the right position. So there you go. Just a couple minutes of tweaking, grinding, welding. Both tires are facing the same way. So what we're going to do now is we have this conduit. This is old steel that I picked up over the years. And we're going to use this to double our tie rods. But what we're going to do is we're going to cut it in half, the length. Now we need a 12-inch piece, so what we're going to do is we're going to cut it half, rotate it, cut it half, cut it to 12, and then we're going to crimp it in the vise. And I'll show you how to do that. So, let's get the car back up, get the tires off, get this cut, and then I'll show you the next step. So as you can see, this tie rod right here, now this is that 12-inch long half moon pipe that we cut. As you can see, nothing too fancy about that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take it and we're going to put it on the bottom. And then we're going to make this fit by squeezing it to close those gaps around there. It looks like with these older ones down here, we're going to have to cut the fins off for the tie rod actual end. So what we want is we want one piece that basically touches this unit up here so that when it gets hit, it forces it right into it, so that way it doesn't want to break. So this is what I've got. As you can see, it's much more bent, and all I did was bend this in my vise. So there's the one end. See how it gets narrow as it goes down? And then I beveled the ends. So this is going to sit right underneath there like that. And that's going to basically put one solid piece of steel right from the end of the tie rod right to your steering rack. Now this is mostly what I do on my compacts, but this has always worked really good on my compacts. On a Cavalier, which has steel spindles, I was once hit a lot in the passenger side because I was being beaten up in the ring, basically. And they couldn't bend my tie rod, and they couldn't break the ball joint. So on a steel spindle Cavalier, they actually broke the spindle. So that says something, that this is strong enough to take the abuse where the spindle is actually the weakest link over top of the ball joint and the tie rod. Now, I don't actually do anything to the ball joint itself down here. Maybe I'll take a piece of chain and I'll bolt the piece of chain or weld a piece of chain to this nut and then weld the piece of chain to there. Who knows? We'll decide that later. But let's get this welded. Look at that thing just glowing red. So that's how I do my tie rods. And as you notice, there's probably, you guys can probably see the zigzags all the way up and down. What I do that for is I do that not only to, the welds do help and strengthen the steel, but I also heat the whole steel up evenly, and that way it cools down evenly. You don't want the steel to be hot in one spot and not hot in another. I find that it helps it stay the same hardness all the way through. Now, I'm not going to quench this or anything like that. All I'm going to do is let it cool on its own. But there you go. That's how I do my tie rods. And honestly, it's never let me down yet. So, let's just duplicate this for the other side. And tie rods are done on this. So that's another item I can mark off the list. So there you go. Both sets of tie rods are done. There's the driver's side. And there's the passenger side. So now this car steers, turns, I guess that's the same thing, but it does not stop and it does not move. So much more to do to this car. Let's keep going, but that's another item we can check off the list is tie rods.